All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the M Sister Studios podcast in accordance with our Creative Content for a Cause Season 1. Now, I know I mentioned in my intro video that we are going to be making content based around the samurai, their history, their culture, their religion, everything about them, and kind of build on top of that. But before continuing on in the series, I wanted to make a video of just to let everyone know like the history of them, how they started, what beliefs and ideology and stuff like that drove them to practice what they did and live by their lifestyle, and what none other way is best than to actually have someone who is a professor that has studied them and also knows quite a bit of history, pretty much an expert in this field of study. And because of that, we have here today Professor Lee. Professor Lee, welcome.
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, allow me to thank Daniel for giving me this opportunity to share with you guys a little bit of something that I know, or I think I know, about the history of Japan. Well, I have been working on the subject in the past, I would say some 30-something years. And I taught that in Tacoma Community College, in a history class called The History of Japan, a class that covers the Japanese experience all the way from the very beginning. I would say that from the settling of the Japanese islands all the way through Japan emerging to be an economic superpower today, in one quarter, believe it or not. And of course, the class also covered a portion of the class is about the rise, flourishing, dominance, and decline of the so-called samurai, the legendary samurai. So I guess that whatever I get to share with you is pretty much from that portion of the class.
Right.
Well, let's say how do we begin? And I would say that the first question for most people about the samurai class is where they come from and who are they? And these are the questions that people usually have to begin with. I want to say that the rise of the samurai has a lot to do with the decline of the Japanese imperial power. As some of you probably know that in the history of Japan, there once upon a time was an imperial power. There was an emperor, basically. And in fact, the emperor was once upon a time quite powerful. And that was going all the way back to, I would say, something like 600. And as a result of Japan's engagement, as a result of Japan's involvement in a war with its neighbors, Korea and China, in the constant military engagement, the Japanese picked up quite a lot of ideas from their neighbors, particularly from Imperial China. By that time, the Chinese imperial system has very well developed. And in the battlefield, the Japanese found out, wow, the Chinese army seemed tough, huh? How come? That is because they have an emperor. The emperor was in command. Maybe that is what we can do too. So that's how they get things going. So they picked up a few ideas and they changed their chieftain's title into the so-called tenno. Tenno in Japanese, it means heavenly emperor. It's a mix of the Japanese and then the borrowing from the Chinese. The Chinese have the name emperor called Huangdi, but the Japanese, instead of calling it Huangdi, they call it Tenno. They meet halfway, heavenly emperor, and then to give this Japanese emperor a very distinct religious dimension, religious power quality. That is how the Japanese imperial power started up. Now,
before that, what did they have in place before they decided to have an emperor? Was it like clans or different families?
Right.
Okay.
Before they have an emperor in Japan, it was primarily the tribal society. There were about if you look hard enough, you can find probably about 30 or so tribes. But in fact, scholars agree that there are a lot more than that, probably like 200-300 tribes across the Japanese islands, and they fought one another. And then in the long fighting, and of course, and some become powerful, more powerful than others. And then one of them became more powerful than others, worshipped the sun. They worship the sun as their kami, as their gods. And that is the so-called, we call it the SunWorshiping Family.
Okay.
If you remember what the Japanese national flag looks like, it's just a red dot in a white background, right, representing the sun. So that is pretty much the legend. It goes all the way back to the SunWorshiping Family.
So their flag today is inspired by something that has been in place for over 1,000 years.
Exactly.
Wow. That's
exactly.
Pretty cool.
Exactly. Okay, but going back to the Imperial Family, and the Imperial Family gained a lot of power around the 600, again, through their interactions with the Koreans and the Chinese. And then the imperial power had been in place for the next, I would say, 300 years or so. There were a lot of changes. They modified, they reformed the government structure according to the Chinese model. And they passed the laws, a sequence of laws, again, following the Chinese model. All this allowed the Japanese imperial power to be quite strong. The emperor was in control. And as a result of that, the Japanese as a country, under the leadership of the SunWorshiping Family, now we call it Imperial Family, the Imperial Family, expanded greatly. Originally, the tribes we were talking about were concentrated very much in southern Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, in that area, in the inner sea area, and that we call it the Kansai, or the west of the pass area. And now, because the emperor or the imperial power became so strong, they started to expand toward the Kanto area, or the east of the pass. Basically, they moved east. They expanded toward the east.
So they had, like you said, these families, or they were a tribal system, but then one decided that they wanted an emperor. So not all the other tribal families were on board with this. Did they have to like expand their power to kind of convince, either verbal or with force, convince
by power,
other families to join?
Yeah, right, very right. Well, it's a system. See, the imperial family, they have a group of tribes that support them. And that they were strongest to begin with, and with the support of some tribes that make them stronger. If you take on just any other individual tribe, the imperial tribe, the tribe that worshiped the sun, turned out to be much more superior. But the sun-worshipping tribes also use diplomacy, also use religion, also use persuasion to talk other tribes into joining them. And of course, the military is always the backup. If you don't listen, we're gonna let you know what it feels like to be conquered. So that's what happened. In the next 300 years or so, the this SunWorshiping family, leading a group of its followers, expanded toward the Kanto area, the eastern area, basically northeastern area. If you have a map on your head, a Japanese map, you know, the land goes like this.
Yep.
Goes sticking out. And so that's how the Japanese imperial family expanded their influences, conquering a lot of other tribes that previously did not join them, and now they face an option. They will either join us or be wiped out, or being kicked out, driven out. And many of those tribes, in fact, were ethnically different people, and they were, you know, and you heard about the Japanese Ainu people. In fact, once upon a time, there were many of them in the Kanto area. And in the continuous war, diplomacy, interaction, many of them, step by step, little by little, became absorbed into the so-called the family of the Japanese people. But at the same time, there were many who resisted, and they got driven out. They got marginalized and continually pushed north, more and more north. So that is the situation from 600 to about 900. Okay. Now let's fast forward to 900, around the 900 also. By the time that by the 9th century, the Japanese imperial family gradually lost its power. Okay, why is it so? The reason's very complex. Of course, I can go on and on forever, but let's just make it so that just look at the world history. The Roman Empire, Persian Empire, Alexander the Great's empire. No matter whichever empire, there's sometimes it's very strong. There's sometimes it started to decline. It seems it's always so. But bottom line is that the imperial family lost its power and influence. And then the emperor could not collect taxes from the people. And without the tax, they could not pay the imperial army well enough so that the army can function well. So the result is that there began to be disorder. Let's say someone break into your house. And what do? The first thing is that you pick up the phone and call 911, right? The police will show up and get them. That's usually what happened. But things is that now, because the police is underpaid, the imperial army is underpaid, someone broke into your house, you pick up the phone, you dial 911, nobody showed up. Okay, so what do?
You protect yourself.
People, right, just like what happened here in this country, people begin to grab an AK-47 and put it under their pillow. Of course, and back in Japan, there's none such a thing. What happened is that a lot of these local families, and particularly those who earned land, okay, who worried about their property being damaged, being stolen, under the circumstances where the imperial army could not come and help them, they felt they have to help themselves. Okay, sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And that is how, in answering our question, the samurai originated.
Really? So they were just, initially, they were just people trying to protect whatever they had, whether it be a house, their land, essentially their families, just anything. Right. So that's how they started. Where did they learn then the martial arts portion of it? Okay, very good. Yeah. Very good.
Of course, and it's a process of what we call the militarization. Militarization. To begin with, and these are just some landowners who till their lands. But now the time changed. The time changed to such a time that they have, since they cannot count on the imperial army, they have to rely on themselves. So usually, the family started from the father. Let's say it's a family of 5 people, one father with two, three sons, two, three big sons. And the father was in his 40s and the sons were in their 20s. Usually, what they did is that they get up in the morning. The first thing is they practice martial arts. They kick the trees. They move the rocks, and just started up from something very simple as this, and gradually they also developed the samurai, what we call the samurai band. Let's say, indeed, on one of the days, the bandits really came, descended on the village and started to attack. And what would you do? You know you cannot count on 911. You cannot count on the Imperial Army. So what do? And what happened is usually the father would become the leader naturally in that particular family, followed by his sons. And oftentimes, and there are people who associated with the family. For example, the son-in-law. Very simple, The son-in-law would also join them. Or let's say the father has a little brother who passed away in the previous fighting, and he left behind a couple of sons. And that is the father's, you would say, nephews, right? The nephews also join them. So you see, with the father as the leader of the family, surrounded by his sons, and in Japanese they call it ienoko, or the sons of the house. And then the nephews, the son-in-laws, and then people who actually associated with the family, in even if it is not in-law, sometimes it's just someone. Let's say your very, very best friend's son, right? Your best friend died, your son, you take his son under your protection, and the son will become a guest of the house. And they would call it kenin or gokenin, or the guests of the house. So ienoko, gokenin. And this constituted the members of what we call the Bushi band. You see, it's a group, it's a band, it's a Bushi band, samurai, warrior. A Bushi band would have one leader, that is the father, and would have the core members, and that's the ienoko, the sons of the house. And you have gokenin, or the guests of the house.
Okay.
So you have these different rings, the center, the inner ring, the inner circle, and then the outer circle. And that constitutes one single Bushi band.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is just for one house though. So say, for example, if the adversaries don't just attack one house, but they attack multiple.
Of course.
What happens then? Do the bands, like I understand that each house has their own leader. So will the leaders come together to work together to fight off the same adversary? Well, just for one time, or for continuous, they make a partnership?
Very good question. Very, very keen question. I started up with one particular family so that we get a very close look at the structure of the band. We're going to go back to the regional level, let's say in the village level, and then in the local level, in the regional level, even finally toward the end in the national level. In different levels, you have, of course, and more than one of these Bushi bands. Well, there were many of them. How many? I don't know. Okay, but I would say hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds. Now, some are very powerful. Some, over the long years of fighting, gradually establish themselves as powerful. They became reputed as superior Bushi bands. They earned the reputation. They earned the fame.
How did they earn that? Was it just by word of mouth? Like they kind of like, oh, like this family is very, honorable to what they say, and they did this, this, and that? Or like, did they actually see it firsthand? Like, oh, like I see what they did there. Like they
Both.
should be both. Okay.
Both by winning battles, basically, by winning battles repeatedly. And you have someone who are superior in terms of their military techniques, and they are able to prevail in the battlefields more often than being prevailed over. And they gradually emerge to be the victor, the dominant leader among the many bush bands. And once this happened, there will be an effect that followed immediately. Many smaller bush bands would come to serve them.
Oh, okay.
Okay, like, they constellate toward, gathered around them, rallied to them, appealed mostly by their reputation, and of course, and for practical purposes, and hoping that they would get protection from this powerful guy. And there are quite a few of those who gained the reputation as in the national level, as powerful bush bands. I can name some. One is Minamoto, and the other is Taila. You heard about those names, and most people heard about these names, and you play the computer game, Minamoto.
Yeah.
So Minamoto in particular grew increasingly powerful. Now these two families are quite different. Each one of them gathered a big following. Many of those individual bush bands, many of those individual families were rallied to each one of them, and they formed the two sort of what do you call that? The military alliance system, just like a Warsaw Pact and NATO.
Established like a treaty or an agreement between the two.
There was no formal treaty,
just by word of mouth, like, hey, like we're not gonna do that to each other, right?
That's right. Now they're also quite different. These two are quite different. The Taila family was based more on the Kansai area, on the Western Japan, and then it involved the family, the people who supported the Taila family. Many of them are the older aristocracy, the older aristocratic families that still had some memory of some sort of a centralized control and imperial power, and they're still having that kind of a
mindset,
and a connection.
Okay.
Whereas Minamoto, on the other hand, is based more on the east, or the Kanto area. If you remember what I said previously, the Kanto area, the eastern area, is a newly conquered region, and that is a place that the lands was just recently annexed from the hands of the Ainu people, the imperial control there was never firmly established. And that is to say, in that area, in the Kanto area, the local powers, or the samurai, they are a lot more powerful. They are a lot more powerful. And so these two groups, these two gigantic military groups, was doomed to collide, of course. And you know
inevitable.
Inevitable. And then the collide finally did come. I mean, for most of the time, Taila had the upper hand, but in the final showdown in 1185, it's a memorable year. I mean, I don't expect the students to remember all the years, but some years are worthwhile remembering.
So it sounds like the time it took for the rise and fall of the imperial system to the rise of the samurai took about the same time, around 300 years. I was trying to think about in my head, okay, how long would this potentially take? But you just answered it, about 300 years. And
something like
two big families to finally collide.
Right.
That's
something
a long
like
time.
200-300 years.
Yeah, that's a long time. But I mean, that's just common, just, based on the state of the world at that time,
Right. Right. Well, first of all, the decline of the imperial power is a gradual process. Of course, and when I spoke about it, I seem to make it like it's a snap of your finger. In fact, it takes a long time. They chipped away the Japanese imperial power get chipped away little by little, little by little. Let's say you collect taxes from the people. Well, this year you collect 1 million. Next year you collect probably just 10 ounces of silver short, less. So 10 is not much. But if you do that continually over the many, many years, 300 years later, there's a big difference.
Yeah. Before we continue, so in terms of the imperial power, because I know that wasn't there some type of imperial system or like an emperor or anything in the 1900s, or am I mixing up? Like
yes, we'll get to that later.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to that.
But it's not the same one. It's one that maybe started later. It is a reincarnation,
but it's not exactly the same.
It's not the same one. Okay, so there was one imperial power for Japan that started off in the 600s, and then there was that decline, and then there was another one later on.
Well, if you ask the Japanese emperor, they say we are the same family,
but they're not.
Yeah, well, maybe yes, maybe not. That I cannot okay. You have to test their DNA, but if you ask them, their identity is. They say, they claim that today's Japanese emperor is the direct descendants of the first Japanese emperor Jimmu. That goes back to 660 BCE. He claims so, but I cannot promise that none of the family cheated on their husband. That I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to think of content. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that sometime later. So, after the battle in 1185, the Minamoto, the military group based in the Kanto area, prevailed. Yep. Okay. And they gained the dominance. They gained the control nationwide for the entire Japan. Now, remember, the Japanese emperor was at that time in a city called Kyoto. Today, that's Kyoto. And at that time, they call it Heian. And a different name, but it's the same thing. Whereas Minamoto, after establishing his dominance, did not bother to move his headquarters to Kyoto. Instead, he stayed in the Kanto area, and he established a military camp in a place called Kamakura. And today, that place is still called Kamakura. If you go to Japan and you visit Kamakura, it's a very nice beach, but it's an ancient time. And Kamakura is something, I think, 40-50 miles from Tokyo. Okay. It's basically Tokyo. It's
like the outskirts or like the suburbs.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so from Kamakura, Minamoto family governed the entire country.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Through his deputies, of course, and he appointed his powerful generals. He had many, many generals. And remember, many of those bushy bands came to offer service to him. And many of them became his top generals. And he appointed the generals to different provinces and to keep an eye on local rebels and making sure taxes are paid and so on and so forth.
Kind of like a governor in a sense?
He called himself shogun.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
He was the first shogun in Japan.
Gotcha. Okay. I know that word.
Okay. And it is a military rule, very distinct military rule. See, the civilian government system under the emperor, all those governor, prefectures and prefect and magistrates, and they are still in place. But at the same time, on top of that, there's another tier of power superimposed on them, and that is the people that Minamoto, or the Kamakura Bakufu, we call it the Kamakura military government. Bakufu means military governments, appointed. Minamoto appointed a general to, let's say, Piwalap. Now, in Piwalap, the magistrate was still there, appointed by the emperor. It is just that nobody really goes to see the magistrate. Nobody care about them. It's just a facade. You see,
Figurehead.
It's a figurehead. And I am the one that Minamoto appointed me in Piwalap to oversee that region. Now, when people had an issue, they come to me.
Mm-hmm.
They don't come to magistrate.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So it's that kind of situation. It's that kind of situation. Now, going to the structure of the Samurai. Now, remember, I am working for Minamoto. I'm the head of my own bush band. I'm working for Minamoto. Now, Minamoto, the relations, the bonds between me and Minamoto is a matter of land giving and receiving. Minamoto promised me that I get to have 500 acres in Piwalap. And these 500 acres of land in Piwalap belong to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reason why I served him.
Okay.
Sounds familiar?
Yep.
It's just very, very similar to medieval Europe.
Yep.
So I get to claim that 500 acres of land in Piwalap, and that is the salary he paid me in return for my service for him to keep Piwalap safe.
Mm-hmm.
And he himself stationed in Tacoma, let's say. Now, what happened after many years? I died. What happened to those lands? Of course, under the system at that time, the lands would go to my son. Minamoto is not going to take it back. The land is mine. You see, I get to pass it along my family line.
Does that mean though, since you're passing along the land, do your sons have to serve as well in order to keep that land? Okay.
Of course. Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. My son would continue to serve as his vassal, as Minamoto's vassal. And Minamoto continued to be his lord, or maybe Minamoto's son at that time. I died, Minamoto also died. and my son take over, and his son also take over. See, by the time that I served Minamoto, the bonds between me and Minamoto could be very strong because he and I are buddies. We rode on horseback. We fought in the battlefield together. He fell, I grabbed him. I fell, he grabbed me. So we are comrades in the battle. We have very strong bonds. But our sons are different. You see, and the two youngsters probably, chances that they don't even become friends all that much. So the bonds became a lot diluted.
Okay.
It's not that strong anymore. It's just an idea. Oh, you are my lord. Oh, you are my vassal. I have to be loyal to you. It is just an idea.
Okay. Is that why, I might be getting ahead of myself. Is that why then, when people think of samurai or study about them, there's not really there's an association to their family, but after that, they kind of, I wouldn't say do their own thing, but they have their own, like you said, their band or their family that they fight for. But after that, it's to be determined in a sense, I guess you could say. I'm not really sure about that.
Well, see, the sense of loyalty is cultivated. Just like you train a dog, you tell the dog to do this and do that and do this and do that, it becomes some sort of ethos. Becomes some sort of ethos, and then loyalty became a central ethos for the samurai, because that's the needs. And when a lord leads a group of people to the battle, loyalty is the at most important thing that he expects of the vassals. He could not tolerate a vassal turning the back to him, and so I would say the sense of loyalty is cultivated deliberately on purpose for that purpose, and later on it becomes a central ethos, like I say, and became exaggerated, became amplified became even divinized, and
Okay.
And it becomes something that we today associate with the
Like a core
Samalayis.
value, like loyalty.
Right, the core value.
Okay.
Whereas in fact, in the history, if you ask me, that's what I will say. Plenty of betrayals. I will tell you, there are plenty of betrayals. Now, just going back to the particular context I was talking about, I died, my son take over. Minamoto died, his son take over. Between the two sons, the bonds became weakened, and they don't get along so that well, all that well. And one of the days, my son would do some calculation, what's the gain and what's the lose, and he decided to switch sides. It happened all the time. Man. It happened all the time in history. Once again, the so-called samurai are always loyal, and that is an image cultivated, deliberately nurtured in the later time, particularly in the imperial time. I will talk about in the imperialist time during the 19th century again.
Okay.
You see, when the Japanese emperor really wants the kamikaze fighters to sacrifice their life for him, he begin to say, "Oh, you know what? You're great. You're always loyal. That's our tradition. Go do it." Otherwise, how do you make people die for you?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so before we continue on, the question I was thinking about is, you were saying that the way they started training was just kind of like, going outside, training martial arts in the morning, kicking trees and stuff like that. Were they influenced? Because you also said they were influenced for their imperial system from their other countries. So in terms of the martial arts, were they influenced from other countries as well? And that's what led to the development of their own specific training and martial arts style as well?
I believe so. I suppose so. In that particular topic, I did some reading, but not a whole lot. Questions like this belong to sort of like a different fields. I field of what we call the military history field. People who are trained and published and rise in that particular field are somehow separate from the fields that I am in. I read some of what I have, but not a whole lot. I guess my general answer to that question is that I believe, it is a yes. And not only that, but also the Japanese took what they learned, what they picked up from their neighbors, and put on their unique spin to it. If you examine their weapon, for example, they have something of their own. The Japanese samurai knife is somewhere in between a sword and a knife.
Right.
And it's a combine of the two. You can use it to chop, and you can often also use it to poke. You can use the Japanese samurai knife for both purposes.
Right.
Instead of like in China, the sword is for poking and the knife is for chopping.
Right.
So anyway, things like that, and there must be a lot to say. I will just leave it for some experts,
the same concept is just like how they used ideas and other stuff from their neighboring countries. They use it for their martial arts as well.
Right. I can talk about that. I can talk about how they transform the Buddhism, for example, and so on and so forth.
We can get to that in a bit.
Now talking about the Buddhism, since we are in that phase already, see, one of the questions about the samurai is about their religion. Again, going back to the time of the imperial rule, in a time when the Japanese emperor was powerful, the Japanese emperor, out of their selfish purpose, of course, and really put in a lot of spin, trying to promote Confucianism. To make complicated things simple, Confucianism basically is to say that if I am your lord, if I'm your king, you should obey me. If I'm your father, you should obey me. If I'm your husband, you should obey me. You're the wife. That's what Confucianism try to propel, try to claim, try to advocate. And so the emperor, of course, liked this idea.
Yeah, of
The emperor
course.
liked this idea. And then the emperor, again, made a lot of efforts trying to propel the influence of Confucianism. And teaching, lecturing on the kids and say, you have to obey the emperor, you have to obey the father, you have to obey the husband and all that. The elder, the younger should obey the elder and all that. But when things become so disordered, the country became so disordered because of the imperial power lost its influence. You can say the country was in chaos. Nobody cared about the Confucianism anymore. Imagine that the bandits may come and break into my house, and you tell me, now you try to lecture on me and tell me that I should obey this lecture on that order or that decree. I don't care. I need to survive, right? I need to survive. So Confucianism gradually lost its influence. Now, with Confucianism lost its influence, what would replace it? Right? That's the question. There are quite a few things, and the Japanese have their own teaching, of course, and they worship the different kamis. They worship different kamis, and then and together the collective worship is what we call the Shinto. Shinto, the term Shinto actually is a borrowing from the Chinese. The two Chinese characters are the Chinese pronounce it Shen Dao. The Japanese try to say Shen Dao, but they didn't say it so well. It become corrupted into Shindo. So that is you can hear the sound. And then so that is the Japanese worship. Basically, if you ask what is Shindo exactly, it is just a worship of many different things. Often even phenomena, let's say thunderstorm. Let's say we meet the Imperial Family that worship the sun, right? And you have tribes that worship the bear, the tiger. There's no tiger there, but the bear and different things, rock, even wind, and many different things. It's very disunity. What's the right word? It's very disorganized, very decentralized. It is useful for each individual tribe. Let's say in our family, we worship the bear. Of course, the bear will become a rallying point for the family, but not for my neighbor. The neighbor worships something quite different. You see, it's a very decentralizing system. Okay, so Shinto doesn't really help. Believe it or not, it's not quite a strong candidate for replacing Confucianism. After Confucianism's influence receded, Shinto filled in some of the gaps, but not a whole lot. Okay. And the other candidate is Buddhism. Buddhism was introduced into Japan from Korea, via Korea, originally. From China, but if you go all the way back to India, of course, it's a different lecture. But the Buddhism, the particular Buddhist school that were introduced into Japan were what we call the Chinese-nized Buddhism. You see, the Indian Buddhism and the Chinese Buddhism became two quite different things, and there are many things in common, of course, and they're still Buddhism, but there are a lot of spins that are very uniquely Chinese, very uniquely Chinese. For example, all Chinese Buddhism, Buddhist schools are Mahayana Buddhist schools. Mahayana. There are two schools in Buddhism. One is Mahayana, the other is Hinayana. Mahayana believe in, to make it very simple, universal salvation. And that is to say, everybody can be saved. Everybody can reach nirvana. Reach this goal. Right. So that is the promise of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, as a result, all Buddhist schools in Japan are Mahayana because it came from China. It came from China. Hinayana is popular only in some regions in Southeast Asia, like in Thailand, in Thailand, in India too, of course, but it's never really powerful or influential in China, nor in Korea, nor in Japan. So Buddhism became very influential in Japan. Now, that is the teaching, appealing to the samurai very well, very much. Why is this so?
Yeah, why is that? Because I know I talked to an individual about the samurai and their religious beliefs, and like almost like 90% of the time it was Buddhism, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, if when they go to war they kind of lean more towards Shinto, maybe because it's the whole idea of war and stuff. But so I mean, you're about to clarify it, but that's what I read like in research and also heard, so you can probably definitely clarify that or go more into detail about that.
Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with one of the central concepts in Buddhism. Buddhism was speaking about reincarnation, of course, and after you die, your soul would move on and migrated to another body. Basically the body is just a bag, a bag holding the soul.
From my research, it's like you keep on reincarnating until you do reach nirvana, and then it's done. You reached it. Okay.
Right. So that is the central idea. I mean, plus Mahayana Buddhism is particularly appealing to the samurai because of its simplicity. Okay, just going back to a little bit more about the difference between Hinayana and Mahayana. Hinayana literally means lesser vehicle, a small car, basically. A small car can take only less passenger, like 1 or 2 passenger. Hinayana Buddhism emphasizes on individual enlightenment. If you want to reach nirvana, you have to work on it. There's no other way.
Oh, okay.
Mahayana, which means literally greater vehicle. A greater vehicle can carry a lot more passengers, like a bus. Many people can hop in and they take you somewhere. So Mahayana Buddhism promised something quite different. It promised salvation by faith.
Okay.
That is to say, you don't really understand exactly what Buddha was talking about. So long as you have the faith in him, you can be saved.
Okay.
Okay, simple as this. So that really catered to the needs of the samurai. Look, think about who the samurai could be. They are land tillers to begin with. They own land. They till the land. If the bandits did not come, they would break their back and just dig the dirt. That's what they did. They really did not have time to, let's say, sit down and read Confucianism and memorizing what Confucius taught them. They don't care. They don't bother. They don't even know Chinese. They really, this is not something that they want. But when in a time of chaos, when they have frequently been involved in the battle, death is imminent. You never know. Maybe the next battle, maybe just in any ditches, you just find your burial. So for them, the death was so imminent. The Buddhist promise of reincarnation became particularly appealing.
Okay.
Oh, you mean after I died, I'm going to move on? Great. Sounds great to me. And plus, the salvation by faith was really, really a very key for their conversion, for their embracing of Buddhism. See, they don't have to learn. They don't have to study. They don't have to memorize. They don't have to chant all those texts, although many did, but you don't have to. All you have to do is to close your eyes and close your hands, put down your butcher's knife, and chant the name of Bodhisattva. You just call the name of Bodhisattva 100 times, 1,000 times, and you are saved. You don't have to come to an intellectual understanding of Buddha's teaching. the so-called the concepts of emptiness, the concepts of middle way, and the concepts of this and concepts of that. You don't have to understand that. All you have to do is call upon his name.
Okay.
And then you are saved. And that really cater to the needs of the Samurai, who most of them are, I would say, illiterate. They did not even read and write. And not to mention they can comprehend the Buddhist classics. The chances that they don't, but they do have the faith, or at least they can have the faith, and that is also why of the many different schools, Zen Buddhism, of course, and that's a term that most people are familiar with, was particularly popular.
Okay.
Because Zen emphasize on what we call the instant enlightenment.
Okay.
Again, the phrase I used earlier, the phrase is that put down your butcher's knife, you become a Buddha instantly. And that is to say, in the morning, you can have a knife in your hand and chopping people's head down. And in the evening, the moment you put down your butcher's knife, you become a Buddha right away. Wow, so easy. I'm thinking about becoming a samurai. So that really cater to the needs of the samurai very much.
Did did it change at all? Like the more people were becoming like literate and could actually study the text from Buddhism, did it change at all to where now, like, okay, like I'm reading, the information about this religion, I now want to implement more than just having faith in Buddhism itself. I want to do more, like, instill a core values. Did that eventually come along later in time?
Yes.
Because people could read? Okay.
Thank you for asking. I was about to get to that. Well, yeah, so Buddhism, I mean, samurai is not something static. It changed over time. Beginning, if you count it as its origination, it starts somewhere around the 10th century, let's say, and it continued all the way throughout the next few centuries, all the way toward the 16th century. Things changed. A lot of things changed. We cannot get to that so much, but in responding to your question, one of the changes that they went through is took place during the so-called Tokugawa period of time. Tokugawa ruled Japan from 1600. It's a very easy to remember a year, 1600. All the way to 1868, all the way to the coming of the American Matthew Perry, and 200 something years later. It was a period of time of peace. Samurai was tamed. Samurai became tamed because there was no more warfare. Tokugawa Ieyasu, this is the name of the shogun who established the Bakufu rule, who established the Tokugawa Tokugawa government. And he was very skillful in keeping peace. He developed a system of a series of systems to make sure that the samurai is about 300 also, these powerful families in Japan, would not step on his back, would not step on each other's back like they used to. For many years, for many centuries, the samurais was just like, you chop down me and I chop down you. They fought one another for centuries. But now with the ascendance of the samurai, the Tokugawa Bakufu, peace was restored. And the samurais became tamed. They were gathered in the castle town. Okay, it has, well, by the way, just a sidekick, it has a lot to do with the introduction of the firearms too. The Western firearms was introduced to Japan during that time, about that time. Now, before that, the battlefield, ideal battlefield was in the open fields. You ride on the horseback and I ride on the horseback. We charge to each other, bang. That's what happened. But now with firearms, things changed. You don't charge to me anymore, or I'm going to drop you in 200 yards away. So it doesn't make sense for you to charge to your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those powerful families started to build castle towns. And instead of sending out their samurais to the field, to open field to engage each other, they gathered the samurais inside the castle town. So that's what we meant when we say the samurais became tamed. Now, inside the castle town, it's not easy. Well, still little violence are still, it still happen, and there are still rebellions and revolts and things happen once in a while. But by and large, compared to the previous centuries, the Tokugawa period of time since 1600 became a much more peaceful, much more.
So if there was an instance that the samurai would be used, and I think this is maybe where people kind of get the image of the samurai when they think about them, it's more of individual, like a samurai going up against another fellow samurai, because for now big conflicts, if there's going to be any, it'd be more modern with firearms and stuff.
Yes and no. Well, yes, in a sense that yes, it when it happened, yeah, it did happen that way. No, in a sense, because the peace was owed more. The peace, the establishment of the peace, owed a lot more to the system that Tokugawa Ieyasu established. He made it so. He made it so that there was no way for you to stab the back of your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'm not going to get into that, into the system, but that's what I do in the class. I just spend hours talking about these many different systems. But hey, there's a way. For example, he established some sort of a system where he was stationed a samurai, a daimyo. You heard about that term, a powerful samurai family, the daimyo, right next to another daimyo that is not particularly trustworthy, so that you'll be watched. You'll be watched 24 hours and 7 days.
Okay.
There's no chance for you to rise up. Now, it's very fragile, very delicate kind of a system.
You have to find a balance.
Yeah, balance, right. But it worked. It proved working quite well. For 260 years in Japan, there was no major war.
Right. Because though he made the samurai more tame, is this where now like only a few people would practice it, because now the samurai are only used to protect these, like you said, castle towns that now, okay, we don't need as many anymore because now we have firearms and all this other stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, the thing is that once the samurais were gathered in the castle town, they still have to do something, right? Of course, and they continue to train. They every day in the morning, they still get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and kick the tree and move the rock. They still do that. But at the same time, because there was no warfare, many of them became very lax. I just grew a little lazy. I don't feel like to get up today. I'm gonna just sleep in. Many of them became so, and then many of them became employed by their lords as accountant, as tax collectors, as tutor, and many of them developed interest in things other than martial arts. They may develop the interest in, let's say, calligraphy, how to write beautiful characters. And then many of them develop interest in whatever you call it. You putting the flowers in a vase.
Oh yeah.
Things like that. Things like that. They develop things in many different
different areas interest. Okay.
Right. And that is when they were tamed. And of course, and in answering your earlier question, many of them developed interest in learning, studying, cultivating literal cultivation, studying and memorizing ancient proses, ancient poetries. They became very versed in that. They became scholars, basically.
So they became multidimensional in the sense that they're not just martial artists anymore.
Right.
They're more complex than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But their status remained the samurai. And that is the status was still hereditary. And that is to say, after they passed away and the son get to inherit the title, the samurai, they still have the privilege. And of course, and you know the famous privilege is that they are the only one who have the right to carry arms. They carry two arms, one long sword and another short sword. So they continue to have these privileges, and it's just that many of them just don't use them anymore. Okay. And yeah, that situation continued all the way through the coming of Matthew Perry in the 19th century, the American dude. And then there was a movie, if people are interested, and I recommend, it's a movie, Japanese movie. It's made in Japan and acted by the Japanese actors, and with an English subtitle called The Twilight Samurai. Not Last Samurai, Twilight Samurai. I highly recommend that movie if you want to understand why and how the Japanese samurai as a class declined during that period of time. And that movie really tells you quite a bit. And it sets against the backgrounds of the coming of the West. In the movie, you can tell that most samurais became very, very lax in their martial training. They just can't use the swords anymore. You just push them, boom, they fell down.
I mean, why? Now, this is what I would be thinking. Why would they have to train if now they have other entities that can protect people, like you, with using firearms and stuff? That's what I would thinking, like, oh, like there's someone else that can do this for me. Like I don't have to be super, you know, into my training and stuff anymore. That because someone else is gonna do it. That's what I'm thinking. That's probably what's going through their brain. Like
good question. Remember I was talking about how Tokugawa developed a series of systems to maintain the peace. One of the systems he developed is the so-called sakaku system, or locking up the country system. He pretty much just banned trades with any outsiders. He kicked out the English, he kicked out the Portuguese, he kicked out the Spanish, he kicked out just about anyone. He allowed the Dutch to stay, but they were not allowed to just move to do anything they want. They were limited in a very small area. They can serve the rich families by playing the violin, but that's pretty much it. Not much. So as a result, firearms was also in the list of being banned. So for that 200 something years, believing or not, the West, of course, and you know that had a lot of wars, and then the firearms developed very fast. And in Japan and in China too, elsewhere in the world, nothing's going on. When the English came, when the Americans came to Japan and came to China, they see, they do have some firearms, but it was made by the Portuguese 300 years ago.
Not updated, not up to date.
So of course, and that's nothing. And for the samurais, for Tokugawa, there was only one thing on his mind, that is peace. And he would do anything to acquire that. He would sacrifice anything to acquire that. And that is usually, that is what happened. So in answering your question, why is it so that they still train? Why don't they just simply grab the most advanced firearms? Well, I guess some of them would like to very much, but the system didn't go that way.
Right. It wasn't in their favor to do so, or
Right.
possibly not be able to do so either.
Right. Right. So the samurai, now we are coming toward the end. The samurai, during this period of time, during the 19th century, they are pretty much in decline. Their status, their training, their ethos, and all those, they are pretty much gone, eroded already. And then with the Meiji Restoration, they do away the Tokugawa Bakufu. They restored the Japanese emperor. If you watch the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, that young boy supposedly was Meiji emperor, supposedly. And they restored the emperor on the throne, to the throne. So everything changed. Everything changed. The samurai was abolished. Their privilege was abolished. For example, their privilege of bearing arms was abolished.
Oh, okay.
They were replaced by something new that they called the Imperial Army. Now, the army was loyal to the emperor, not to the individual lords. However, and that is the reincarnation we are speaking about. Over time, the emperor or the Japanese new leaders realized in the tradition, there are quite a lot of wealth that they can take advantage of. There are a lot of assets they can take use of, and including the samurai ethos of loyalty. And that is when, I would say, some 30-something years after wholesale westernization, there's a period of time after the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese turned to the West, embracing everything Western. But 30-something years later, just one generation later, they changed again. They felt, oh, there's too much West, too much Western influence. We have to backtrack. We have to go back to our tradition a bit. So they started to backtracking toward their tradition. My sensei, the professor I studied with at UW, and he wrote extensively on that topic, on the topic of the Japanese conservatism or the Japanese nationalism. And that is the time when Japanese nationalism or conservatism rise.
Okay.
Of course, and when we speak about the Japanese nationalism or conservatism, you are talking about their past, their tradition. And that is when the samurai tradition became revived, became repackaged, reincarnated, and giving a new life.
Is that the reason why today, if you go to Japan, there's a lot of like the influences of samurai history in the culture today because of that sort of revival of when they took the step back after the whole westernization? Okay.
Very much so. Very much so. It's not that you still have this arm bearing samurai wearing this long gown walking around in the street. No, there's not that. It is the spirit. It is the specter of the old samurai that survived. Like I say earlier, the Japanese Imperial Army. Suppose you are a young Japanese man living in that period of time and you join the Imperial Army. Guess how they train you? Of course, they make you do push-up, they make you do all those things like in all militaries. But at the same time, they also lectured on you, saying, you know what? You have to be loyal. You have to obey the order. You have to be loyal to the emperor. You have to sacrifice your life for the emperor. That's what they lectured in your ear, day in and day out.
Yep.
To brainwash you, indoctrinate you, and to turn you into a creature that they want you to be.
Right.
And that is why they have this kamikaze soldiers who didn't, completely disregard their life. And that's how we explain it.
They had that loyalty ingrained in them to where I'm like, okay, this is where my loyalty lies. If they told me to do this, which they did, I'm going to do it, which is a very, very extreme thing to ask of someone to do.
Right. Very much so. Very much so. It would be interesting if you can find some some kamikaze soldiers to interview, ask them to talk about their experience.
Yeah.
If there's anyone who's still alive, I suppose there are some. But that's interesting. That's interesting. But you see, that is how the old tradition became given a second life. No matter what term you use it, I call it the reincarnation, and you call it revive. And but that is what happened. That is what happened. At that time, and that is what happened. What life was like in the Japanese Imperial Army. The soldiers, the officers, and particularly the lower ranking officers were trained, were brainwashed, indoctrinated in the way that they felt like they were the medieval samurais. They had to be loyal to the emperor. And there was no other way. And that is pretty much part of being a imperial army for them.
Okay.
So that is how, the traditional, the old samurai, if you say the old soldier never die, and that's probably how you explain it in the Japanese context.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, it seems like the samurai themselves have just a lot of history, and I don't think history and complexities. I mean, at first it didn't sound super complex, but like you said, once they got into additional interest and stuff like that, they became complex and more than just samurai.
Absolutely.
Which I think is pretty cool. I'm looking at my questions. I have a few questions that you may be able to answer before we finish up. Now, the term that people also use when it comes to samurai is the term Ronin. Is that what makes a Ronin different than a traditional samurai? Because I know there's samurai and then they're like, oh, a Ronin. So is there a major difference between the two or not?
Yeah, there is a difference. Well, a Ronin is usually a samurai, but not all samurais are Ronin.
Okay.
Ronin, I cannot write the letter. I can find the letter, the kanji, but it basically means ruthless men. They were drifting around.
Okay.
Basically, a Ronin is a samurai, but a samurai whose master died.
Okay.
Okay, if your lord died, what do? You have only one thing on your mind, that is to retaliate, that is to revenge for your lord. You have to find whoever that is that killed your lord and kill him back.
Okay.
And because you have no lord, of course, you are rootless. You have no root. You have no root.
Rootless.
You were drifting around. You were in the hide, and you are in the mountain, you are in the bushes, and you are everywhere. You are dirty, you are filthy, you are smelly, and that's what Ronin tend to be.
Okay.
So that is Ronin. And the Ronin, they are, because of the warfare, the constant warfare, a lot of lords died, of course, and therefore there are a lot of Ronins. And sometimes the Ronins would find new lords, and that would make it easier. But some other times, some individual Ronins, they are very stubborn in their head. They maintain their loyalty to this particular lord and this particular lord alone. They will not change. They will not switch their loyalty. And that is the hard part.
Okay.
And then usually they will become the so-called the elements of violence and elements of insecurity in society. Who knows what they're going to do next?
Oh, okay. They were kind of like a wild card. Like
yeah.
Okay. So that's the major difference. Let me see. So we talked about that. In terms of training, I guess it's just as soon as the sons or their nephews and stuff were old enough to train, that's just when they would start training, right?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Usually, like I said, during the frequent warfare, a lot of people died. And then they died, that they left behind, let's say, 7-year-old son or 8-year-old son. And what are you going to do? Of course, your closest friend would take them under their wing. I will bring your son and adopt him as a ienoko, remember that term?
Yep.
The sons of the house.
Mhm.
Then he's not related to me by blood, but still, I take him in and protect him. I put it under my son. I raised him and I trained him.
Yep.
And of course, and you can expect when he grow up, his loyalty is directed to me. There's no doubt. There's no doubt, because I treated as my son, and then he treated me as his Lord, Father. So I would say I want to add to this. See the Japanese samurai band. The family bonds is something very unique, and that's why the bond is so strong. It is by blood to begin with, and if it is not really by blood, it would be assumed by blood.
Okay.
So they have a lot of adoption things. I adopted you as my son. Why do they bother? Because by adopting someone as the son, they felt like they can seal a sense of loyalty.
Okay. I gotcha. That's very interesting. It sounds like, I mean, you said that it established this sense of loyalty, but it also, I think, in a way shows their loyalty that leader of the household may have in terms of to the family that now their leader passed away. It shows them, this family was very helpful to us, and the least we could do is now be able to raise their children or their son specifically, to train them to be a samurai, to make sure they're on the right path to success and they can continue and protect whatever he owns for the future. So it's kind of like a ripple effect.
Right. Well, and then also another thing to pay attention to is that to begin with, I seem to, perhaps I presented, like the samurai, the families, the original Bushi bands, and to be very benign thing for self-protection. Yeah, it is so. But oftentimes the line between self-protection and aggression could be very blurry.
Right.
It's just, what is right and what is wrong, and they have quite a different set of standards at that time. To begin with, I gathered a group of people around me to protect my property. But when opportunity arose, there's a chance I can snap some lands from my neighbor. Let's do it. So I will become an aggressor in this case. So the line could be very blurry. What is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad. But the bottom line is that it was a time of violence, a time of escalated militarization of society.
And someone had to rise up to the occasion, which eventually led to the rise of the samurai.
Right.
Awesome. Right. I'm looking at my questions. I think we hit pretty much every question that I had in terms of the samurai. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered yet in the last couple of minutes, or do you think we hit everything that we could with the time that we had?
By and large, I think we hit everything, and I would like to recommend, let's say, I recommend a movie already, the Twilight Samurai and the Last Samurai, and I want to throw in one note on that, and that is oftentimes when it's very popular nowadays to study the Japanese business culture. Let's say, how come the Japanese economically was so successful? Well, at least 30 years ago, they were quite successful and competing with us. The Honda beats the Ford, and Toyota beats Chrysler, and so on. Why is it so? You have some scholars who try to study the Japanese business culture in the context of the samurai culture, and saying that actually there are clients and the clientele system. Let's say you are a supplier, you have a clientele. The relations between you and your clientele in many ways resembled the relations between a samurai and his lord. Some people were saying so. I'm not sure if I agree. I'm not sure, but it's a very unique way of looking at it, thinking on it. So that once again tells us one thing, that is the specter of the samurai is still there.
It's still there, and they still have an influence even in today's society, for sure.
Very much so. Very much so.
Oh, I kicked my table. Yeah. I was talking to some martial artists, which will be the next video for those out here listening and watching this podcast. And they were saying, they were talking about just different beliefs and martial art styles that they have. And I think not just samurai, but ancient, historical societies, even that are towards our time, you can learn a lot from them and implement them into your lifestyle just to better yourself and to better others. And I think that's really, really cool. And definitely, I think if people learn something new every day, even from the samurai or anything historical, can definitely benefit them for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I mean, because that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's your profession, so you're an expert in that. All right, before we close out, two things. The first thing, everyone, again, I like to thank Professor Lee for being on our podcast. And this podcast is part of our created content series for a cause, where we will be help bring awareness for the Colorado Veterans Project. All the information for the Colorado Veterans Project, as well as their upcoming Memorial Weekend Ruck March, will be down in the description below. And then the second thing, Professor Lee, do you have, in terms of, we always ask our guests this, do you have any plans in terms of professional, personal goals for the rest of 2021?
Well, professional goals. Well, I am a teaching professor. Research is something that I do only on the side, but I do, whenever there's a chance, I do my own research. And as a teaching professor, I devoted most of my time to teaching. That's what community college is meant to be, I suppose. So my goal, if any, would be pretty much to continue to perfect my teaching. And in addition to the Japanese history, and I also teach the Chinese history and the world history, and I teach a little bit of philosophy also. So that's why I picked up samurai, the Buddhism, and all those things quite easily. So I would continue to perfect myself in those subjects.
We can always, there's always room for improvement,
Right. Which absolutely.
Awesome. Well, anything else you want to add? No.
One, not in particular. Well, I would say that if any one of us are interested, and I will be more than happy to continue to talk. I mean, the thing is that, so long as someone is listening, I can talk.
Yep. So everyone listening out there, if you want Professor Lee to be on another podcast, let us know what topic that we could potentially discuss with him. But again, aside from that, I appreciate everyone that's working on this series, as well as Professor Lee for coming on to talk about this. I really appreciate it that you wanted to come on, and we can continue to grow and create this series to help others. Again, before you guys finish the podcast listening or watching, look at the description below, find the links for the Colorado Veterans Project. Go ahead, follow them, donate, and it's all for a good cause. And with that being said, I'm Daniel Minetti, and I will see you guys next time.